The crimson sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the diplomatic complex as Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the marble corridors of the Galactic Accord headquarters. Her boots echoed against the polished floors, each step a reminder of humanity's precarious position in this vast cosmic community. The walls displayed holographic murals depicting the great civilizations that had come together to form the Accord. The crystalline Zephyrians with their towering spires, the aquatic Nereidans in their bioluminescent cities, and dozens of other species that had achieved interstellar harmony. Elena paused before the massive doors leading to the Grand Assembly Chamber. Through the translucent barrier, she could see the representatives of 347 worlds gathered in their respective atmospheric pods. The sight never failed to humble her. Humanity had been part of this galactic community for only 50 years, yet they had already earned a reputation that made others nervous. Ambassador Vasquez, came a melodic voice behind her. Elena turned to see Counselor Thexari, the lead representative of the Zephyrian Collective. His crystalline form shimmered with internal light patterns that conveyed both respect and concern. "We trust today's proceedings will find humanity in agreement with the proposed regulations." Elena smiled diplomatically, though her stomach churned. Today, the Galactic Accord would vote on the Universal Weapons Limitation Treaty, a document that would effectively ban any weapon technology beyond what they termed primitive kinetic devices. The treaty had been proposed after humanity's recent conflicts with the Sarkesh Raiders, where human military innovation had shocked the galaxy with its brutal effectiveness. Counselor Thexari,
"Humanity has always respected the wisdom of the Accord," Elena replied carefully.
"We understand the concerns about weapons proliferation." The Zephyrian's light patterns flickered with what Elena had learned to recognize as skepticism. "Your species has a remarkable talent for finding creative solutions to challenges. This talent has served you well, but it has also raised questions about your commitment to peaceful coexistence." As they entered the chamber together, Elena reflected on how humanity had earned its fearsome reputation. While other species had developed energy weapons, plasma cannons, and exotic matter disruptors, humans had taken a different path. They had weaponized everything from directed electromagnetic pulses to gravity manipulators, turning their ships into flying arsenals that could adapt to any threat. The Sarkesh had learned this the hard way when their supposedly impregnable fleet had been torn apart by human vessels that seemed to break the conventional rules of space warfare. The Grand Assembly Chamber was a marvel of engineering, with each delegation housed in environmentally controlled pods that allowed species with wildly different atmospheric needs to participate. The central speaking platform rotated slowly, ensuring every delegation could see and hear the proceedings. Above them all, a massive holographic display showed the treaty document, its terms glowing in the script of a dozen different languages. Chancellor Vorthak of the Hegemony Council called the session to order with a deep, resonant tone that translated through the universal communicators. "Honored representatives, we gather today to address a matter of galactic security, the Universal Weapons Limitation. Treaty represents our collective commitment to ensuring that no single species can threaten the peace we have maintained for over a millennium." Elena watched as various delegates rose to speak in favor of the treaty. Each argument followed the same pattern. Weapons technology had advanced too far, too fast. The potential for galactic destruction had grown beyond acceptable limits. The human conflicts with raiders and pirates had demonstrated technologies that could theoretically threaten entire star systems if deployed on a larger scale. Representative Kyleth of the Aquarian Federation spoke with particular passion. "We have seen what happens when warfare becomes an art form rather than a last resort. The humans have turned combat into a science of destruction that goes beyond what any civilized species should possess. Their ability to improvise weapons from civilian technology, to turn cargo haulers into warships, to create devastation from seemingly harmless components. This cannot be allowed to spread." When Elena's turn came to address the assembly, she stood slowly, feeling the weight of 346 different species focusing their attention on her. The chamber fell silent save for the gentle hum of life support systems. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. "Humanity understands your concerns. We have indeed developed weapons and tactics that some find unsettling. but I would ask you to consider why we developed these capabilities." She gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show star charts marking human colonies. Humanity entered this galactic community as one of the younger species. We lacked the energy manipulation capabilities of the Zephyrians, the biological mastery of the hegemony, or the technological sophistication of the Aquarian Federation. When raiders threatened our worlds, when pirates attacked our shipping lanes, we had to adapt using what we had. Elena could see subtle shifts in the atmospheric pods as delegates considered her words. "We developed what you call primitive weapons not out of barbarism, but out of necessity. Our railguns, our kinetic bombardment systems, our chemical explosives. These technologies served us well because they were reliable, adaptable, and could be produced by any human world with basic manufacturing capabilities." The Sarkesh representative, Warlord Grixtar, suddenly activated his communication system. His scarred face appeared on screens throughout the chamber. "The human speaks truth in this," he growled in his guttural language. "Their weapons are not sophisticated, but they are effective beyond measure. When our fleets attacked their convoys, we expected easy victories. Instead, we found cargo ships that transformed into missile platforms, civilian vessels that deployed kinetic kill vehicles, and defensive satellites that revealed themselves to be disguised weapon stations. Humans do not build weapons. They build everything as potential weapons." A murmur ran through the assembly as delegates processed this admission. Elena seized the moment. The warlord speaks accurately. Humanity's approach to defense has always been based on adaptability and redundancy. We do not rely on single solutions or advanced technologies that can fail. Instead, we ensure that every tool, every system, every component can serve multiple purposes when needed. Chancellor Vorthak raised a massive appendage for silence. "Ambassador Vasquez, while your explanation provides context, it does not address our fundamental concern. Your species has demonstrated the ability to create devastation using technologies that other species consider harmless. This makes regulatory oversight extremely difficult." Elena nodded respectfully. "I understand, Chancellor. Humanity is prepared to accept limitations on our weapons development. However, we request that any treaty acknowledge the legitimate defense needs of all member species, particularly those like us who lack access to more exotic technologies." As the debate continued, Elena noticed something troubling in the delegate reactions. This was not merely about weapons control. This was about fear. Fear of humanity's unpredictability, of their refusal to be constrained by conventional thinking, of their tendency to find military applications for civilian technology. The galaxy had grown comfortable with its established patterns of conflict and resolution. Humanity represented something new and potentially destabilizing. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming. 321 delegates voted in favor of the Universal Weapons Limitation Treaty. Only 25 voted against, mostly smaller species who, like humanity, relied on simpler technologies for defense. Humanity's single vote seemed insignificant in the face of such unity. As Elena watched the treaty documents being officially sealed, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. The galaxy had just told humanity to abandon the very innovations that had allowed them to survive in a dangerous universe. They had been asked to trust in galactic protection, while simultaneously being reminded that they were outsiders, too dangerous to be trusted with their own defense. Walking back to the human delegation quarters, Elena's mind was already racing ahead to the implications. Earth would have to decide whether to comply with the treaty or risk expulsion from the Galactic Accord. Either choice would fundamentally change humanity's relationship with the stars. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the UES Determination, watching the final energy weapon being dismantled by automated systems. The massive plasma cannon that had once been the ship's primary armament was being systematically deconstructed, its components sorted into containers marked for return to Earth. Around her, similar scenes played out across humanity's entire fleet as they complied with the Universal Weapons Limitation Treaty. "It feels like we're cutting off our own hands," muttered Lieutenant Rodriguez, her tactical officer, as he watched another piece of advanced weaponry disappear into storage. Sarah understood his frustration. The Determination had been one of humanity's most advanced warships, capable of projecting force across multiple star systems. Now it was being reduced to what the treaty termed acceptable defensive capabilities. Essentially, whatever weapons technology had existed before the development of directed energy systems. The door chimed, and Admiral Marcus Webb entered the observation deck. His weathered face showed the strain of the past 6 months since the treaty had been ratified. As the head of Human Defense Command, he had been tasked with overseeing the massive disarmament process. "Commander Chen, how's the conversion proceeding?" he asked, joining her at the viewport. "On schedule, Admiral. We'll be treaty compliant within the week." Sarah gestured to the work crews below. "The question is, what exactly are we compliant with?" Webb's expression grew thoughtful. "That's actually what I came to discuss. The treaty specifically bans advanced energy weapons, exotic matter manipulation devices, and weapon systems utilizing technologies beyond primitive kinetic force. But the definition of primitive kinetic force is surprisingly broad." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "How broad?" "Broad enough that Colonel Harrison thinks we can work with it." Webb activated a holographic display showing technical specifications. He's been studying historical human weapons development, going back to pre-space technologies. Turns out our ancestors were remarkably creative with what the treaty considers acceptable materials. The display shifted to show ancient Earth weapons, catapults, cannons, crossbows, and siege engines, but then it evolved, showing how these principles could be applied with modern materials and precision manufacturing. Steel, iron, chemical propellants, mechanical systems, all of these are considered primitive by galactic standards, Webb continued. The treaty assumes that without energy weapons, no species can pose a significant threat. They're thinking in terms of their own technological development paths. Sarah began to understand. But humanity never abandoned kinetic weapons completely. We just supplemented them with energy systems. Exactly. And now that we're being forced back to kinetics, we have something the other species don't. 4,000 years of continuous innovation in mechanical warfare. Webb's expression grew almost predatory. "Colonel Harrison has some interesting proposals for our downgraded fleet." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself on the bridge of what was now designated the HMS Retribution. The ship's name had been changed to reflect its new mission profile, but more importantly, its entire weapon system had been redesigned around a philosophy the galaxy thought they understood. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Zephyrian patrol vessel Harmony of Crystals," announced Communications Officer Park. Sarah had been promoted to captain as part of the fleet reorganization. Her ship was one of the first to complete the new weapons integration, and they were conducting shakedown cruises in the outer system. "Put them through." The crystalline features of Captain Shendar appeared on the main screen. His light patterns indicated polite interest mixed with curiosity. "Captain Chen, we have been observing your vessel's unusual energy signatures. Our sensors detect no prohibited weapon systems, but the readings are unexpected." "Captain Shendar," Sarah replied with a diplomatic smile, "we're simply conducting routine systems tests on our newly treaty-compliant vessel. All weapon systems have been verified by Accord inspection teams." "Indeed, but our science officers are curious about the large cylindrical structures along your hull. They appear to be some form of launching mechanism?" Sarah glanced at her tactical display. The Retribution now mounted 12 massive rail launchers, each capable of accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed using purely mechanical and electromagnetic principles. No exotic energy, no plasma fields, just precisely controlled magnetic acceleration of dense metal projectiles. "Those are our primary defensive systems," she said truthfully. "Kinetic projectile launchers using electromagnetic acceleration. All components are made from steel, iron, and other materials deemed acceptable by the treaty." What she didn't mention was that each launcher could fire projectiles with the kinetic energy equivalent of small nuclear warheads, or that the projectiles themselves were works of art. Solid tungsten cores wrapped in programmable matter that could reshape itself during flight, allowing for course corrections, terminal guidance, and even separation into multiple warheads. Captain Shendar's patterns shifted to something resembling confusion. "Your projectiles are moving at considerable velocity for mechanical systems." "Human engineering has always emphasized efficiency," Sarah replied. "We've simply optimized our mechanical systems for maximum performance within treaty parameters." After the Zephyrian vessel departed, Lieutenant Commander Walsh approached Sarah's command chair. As the ship's new weapons officer, He had been instrumental in developing their tactical doctrine around the redesigned systems. Captain, the rail launchers are performing beyond specifications. At maximum charge, we can achieve projectile velocities that rival our old plasma cannons in terms of target effect. Sarah nodded. The rail launchers were just the beginning. The Retribution also carried what the crew had dubbed the medieval arsenal, massive ballistic missile systems that used chemical propulsion to deliver kinetic warheads across interplanetary distances. Point defense systems that were essentially high-speed Gatling guns firing depleted uranium rounds, and most impressively a series of trebuchets. The trebuchets had been Colonel Harrison's idea, and initially the engineering team had thought he was joking. But when scaled up to ship size and built with modern materials, a trebuchet could launch projectiles weighing several tons across distances measured in thousands of kilometers. More importantly, they were completely passive systems. No energy signatures, no electronic components that could be jammed or detected. Just mechanical leverage and momentum. Any word from the other ships in the conversion program? Sarah asked. The Vengeance finished installing their new siege cannon yesterday, Walsh reported. Single-shot chemical propulsion system, capable of firing a 1,000-kilogram tungsten penetrator round. The Defiance has gone a different route. They've turned their entire forward section into a giant crossbow mechanism. Sarah shook her head in amazement. Across the human fleet, ships were being transformed according to a principle the galaxy couldn't understand. That mechanical systems, properly engineered, could be just as devastating as any energy weapon. The key was thinking beyond conventional applications and embracing the fundamental physics that the treaty's authors had overlooked. Captain, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a priority message from Admiral Webb. The Admiral's face appeared on screen and his expression was grim. Captain Chen, we've received intelligence from our contacts in the independent trade networks. The Sarkesh are planning another major offensive against human colonies. They seem to believe that our disarmament has left us vulnerable. Sarah felt a cold smile cross her face. When do they plan to attack, Admiral? Intelligence suggests they're massing forces for an assault on the Kepler 186 system within the month. 3 full battle fleets, including their new Dreadnought-class vessels. Understood, sir. The Retribution and her battle group will be ready. After Webb signed off, Sarah looked around her bridge. Her crew had adapted to their new weapon systems with typical human ingenuity, developing firing solutions and tactical doctrines that turned mechanical weapons into precision instruments of war. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, prepare a full tactical briefing for the department heads. It appears we'll have an opportunity to field test our new system sooner than expected. As Walsh departed to carry out her orders, Sarah returned her attention to the tactical displays showing their weapon systems. The galaxy had wanted humanity to return to primitive warfare, thinking this would limit their effectiveness. What they had failed to understand was that humans had never stopped innovating with primitive weapons. They had simply been distracted by more advanced alternatives. Now, forced to focus solely on kinetic systems, chemical propulsion, and mechanical engineering, humanity was rediscovering just how much destruction could be achieved with steel, iron, and cleverness. The Sarkesh were about to learn that human warfare had never truly been about the sophistication of their weapons. It had always been about the sophistication of their thinking. The Age of Steel and Honor was about to begin, and the galaxy would soon understand that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology. It had been their refusal to accept limitations on what was possible. Warlord Grixtar stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Bone Render, surveying the massive fleet assembled around him. 300 vessels of the Sarkesh war clans floated in perfect formation, their black hulls bristling with energy weapons and exotic matter disruptors. This was the largest force the Sarkesh had assembled in over a century, and it was aimed at one target, the human colony worlds of the Kepler 186 system. War Leader, his tactical officer Krevnash reported with barely contained excitement. Long-range scouts confirm human defensive positions. Their fleet appears to be using the primitive weapons allowed by the treaty. No energy signatures detected beyond basic propulsion and life support. Grixtar's scarred face twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. The soft species of the Accord have neutered the humans. They force them to fight with toys while we retain our true weapons. The intelligence reports had been almost too good to believe. Human ships were mounting crude kinetic launchers and chemical propulsion systems. weapons that would have been laughable against Sarkesh armor. The humans had been forced to abandon the adaptive, unpredictable weapon systems that had made them so dangerous during their previous encounters. "Begin the approach," Grixtar ordered. "Full battle formation. Let us see how human honor fares against Sarkesh steel." The Sarkesh fleet moved toward the Kepler 186 system like a dark tide, their ship's energy signatures blazing across sensor networks. They made no attempt at stealth. This was intended to be a demonstration of power, a message to the galaxy that the treaty had removed the only obstacle to Sarkesh expansion. In the command center of Kepler 186's primary defense station, Admiral Harrison watched the approaching fleet with calm satisfaction. The veteran officer had spent the past 6 months preparing for exactly this moment, turning the human colonies into a testing ground for their new tactical doctrines. "Admiral," reported his tactical coordinator, "Sarkesh fleet is maintaining standard attack formation. They're not adjusting for our new weapon systems." "Why would they?" Harrison replied. "As far as they know, we're fighting with museum pieces." He activated the fleet communication network. "All ships, this is Admiral Harrison. The Sarkesh are coming to test our resolve. Today we show them why humanity has never needed advanced technology to win wars. We've always had something better: human ingenuity." The first contact occurred at the outer edge of the system, where Captain Chen's HMS Retribution led a small screening force against the Sarkesh vanguard. The enemy commander, confident in his technological superiority, ordered a standard energy weapon barrage against the primitive human vessels. "Incoming plasma fire," reported Lieutenant Commander Walsh from his weapons station. "Multiple targeting locks. Evasive maneuvers," Captain Chen ordered. "Let them waste their energy on empty space. When they close to effective range, give them a demonstration of human engineering." The Retribution danced through the plasma barrage with surprising agility. The ship's new design emphasized maneuverability over heavy armor, allowing it to avoid most of the incoming fire while closing distance with the enemy. The Sarkesh commander, frustrated by his inability to land effective hits, ordered his ships to pursue more aggressively. "Captain," Walsh announced, "enemy vessels at optimal range for primary systems." "Fire," Chen ordered simply. The Retribution's rail launchers spoke with thunderous mechanical precision. 12 tungsten projectiles, each weighing several hundred kilograms, accelerated to tremendous velocity and streaked across space toward the Sarkesh formation. The enemy sensors, designed to detect energy weapons and exotic matter signatures, barely registered the incoming kinetic rounds. The impact was devastating. The tungsten projectiles struck the lead Sarkesh cruiser with the force of small meteors, punching through armor plating that had been designed to dissipate energy weapons. The kinetic force transferred into the ship's structure, creating massive internal damage and sending shockwaves through the vessel's framework. "Direct hits on the enemy flagship," Walsh reported with grim satisfaction. Projectiles penetrated their armor and caused severe structural damage. But the Retribution wasn't finished. As the stunned Sarkesh tried to respond to the kinetic attack, the human ship deployed its secondary weapons. The massive trebuchets mounted along the ship's sides launched their payloads in high arcing trajectories that the enemy sensors couldn't track effectively. The trebuchets fired cluster munitions, containers, that broke apart in flight to release hundreds of smaller projectiles across a wide area. The Sarkesh point defense systems, calibrated for energy weapons and guided missiles, were largely ineffective against the unpowered kinetic swarm. "Enemy formation breaking apart," the tactical officer reported. "They're not prepared for multi-vector kinetic assault." The HMS Vengeance joined the battle, its massive siege cannon speaking with a roar that could be felt through the ship's hull. The chemical-propelled penetrator round crossed the battlefield in seconds, striking a Sarkesh destroyer with enough force to punch completely through the vessel and continue on to damage a second ship behind it. Warlord Grixtar watched in growing disbelief as his vanguard was systematically dismantled by weapons he had dismissed as primitive. "How are they penetrating our armor?" he demanded. His science officer, Velkath, frantically analyzed the sensor data. "War leader, the human projectiles carry tremendous kinetic energy. Our armor is designed to absorb and dissipate energy weapons, but these solid impacts transfer all their force directly into our hull structure, then increase power to our shields." "The shields are ineffective, war leader. They're designed to deflect energy. These solid projectiles simply pass through them." The realization hit Grixtar like a physical blow. The Sarkesh had evolved their defenses around the assumption that all advanced warfare involved energy weapons. Their shields, their armor, their tactics, everything was optimized for fighting enemies who used plasma cannons and particle beams. They had no effective defense against massive kinetic projectiles delivered with precision and overwhelming force. "Full fleet advance," Grixtar roared. "Overwhelm them with numbers." The Sarkesh fleet surged forward, their energy weapons blazing as they tried to bring their numerical superiority to bear. But the humans had prepared for this as well. Admiral Harrison's defensive plan unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Human defense platforms, previously dismissed as outdated fixed installations, revealed their true nature. What the Sarkesh had assumed were simple kinetic launchers were actually massive ballistic missile systems, loaded with chemical-propelled warheads that could cross vast distances to strike with pinpoint accuracy. "Launch all ballistic missiles," Harrison ordered from his command center. Full saturation pattern. Hundreds of missiles erupted from concealed launchers throughout the system, their chemical propulsion systems providing steady acceleration over extended periods. Unlike energy weapons that traveled at light speed but required line-of-sight targeting, these missiles could follow ballistic trajectories that took them around obstacles and through areas of space the Sarkesh thought were safe. The missiles struck the Sarkesh fleet like an avalanche of steel and fire. Each warhead was a masterwork of human engineering, kinetic penetrators designed to punch through armor, followed by secondary charges that caused massive internal explosions. Ships that had survived the initial human volleys found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming ordnance. "War leader," Krevnash reported with growing panic. "We've lost 60 vessels and the humans haven't even deployed their main battle line yet." Grixtar stared at the tactical display in horror. His mighty fleet was being torn apart by weapons his species had abandoned thousands of years ago. The humans weren't just using primitive technology, they had perfected it to a degree that made it more effective than advanced energy systems. "Signal retreat," he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. "War leader, if we don't retreat now, there will be no fleet left to retreat with," Grixtar snarled. "The humans have turned warfare into something we don't understand. They fight with the weapons of ancestors, but with the precision of machines." As the Sarkesh fleet turned to flee, Captain Chen received new orders from Admiral Harrison. "Retribution, this is Admiral Harrison. Pursue and harass, but do not engage in close combat. Let them run, but make sure they remember this lesson." The HMS Retribution and her escorts followed the retreating Sarkesh, launching long-range kinetic bombardments that struck fleeing vessels with mechanical precision. The message was clear. Humanity's return to primitive warfare had not made them weaker. It had made them deadlier than ever. As the last Sarkesh ship disappeared into hyperspace, Chen looked around her bridge at the crew that had just revolutionized galactic warfare. They had proven that human innovation could not be constrained by treaties or limitations. When forced to abandon advanced weapons, they had simply made primitive ones more advanced. The age of steel and honor had begun with victory, and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology. It had always been their refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The emergency session of the Galactic Accord Council convened within hours of receiving the battle reports from Kepler 186. Chancellor Vorthak stood before the assembled delegates, his massive frame radiating the tension that had gripped the galaxy since news of the Sarkesh defeat had spread through the communication networks. "Honored representatives," Vorthak began, his deep voice carrying easily through the translation systems, "we are gathered to address an unprecedented situation. A Sarkesh war fleet of 300 vessels has been decisively defeated by human forces using weapons that comply with our recently enacted treaty limitations." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds as delegates from hundreds of worlds expressed their disbelief, concern, and in some cases fear. The crystalline Zephyrians chimed in harmonic patterns of distress, while the aquatic Nereidans released clouds of biochemical signals that translated as extreme agitation. Counselor, Thexari's light patterns flickered with rapid sequences that indicated deep analysis, mixed with growing alarm. "Chancellor, our preliminary reports suggest that the humans achieved this victory using only kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion systems. How is this possible against modern military technology? Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat quietly in the human delegation pod, watching the reactions around her with careful attention. She had anticipated this moment from the day the treaty was signed. The galaxy's assumptions about warfare were about to collide with human reality, and the results would reshape everything. The combat reports indicate that human vessels achieved near-total tactical superiority using weapons, systems that our technology assessors deemed primitive, reported General Kothvar of the Hegemony Military Council. His scarred features showed the confusion of a professional soldier encountering something beyond his understanding. Their kinetic projectiles penetrated Sarkesh armor that should have been impervious to such attacks. Representative Zalthis of the Aquarian Federation activated her communication system, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with urgent questions. Our scientists have analyzed the battle recordings. The human projectiles achieved velocities that approach the theoretical limits of electromagnetic acceleration. How did they accomplish this without violating treaty restrictions? Elena stood slowly, feeling the weight of several hundred alien gazes focusing on her. This was the moment she had been preparing for since the treaty's ratification. Honored delegates, humanity has operated strictly within the parameters established by the Universal Weapons Limitation Treaty. All of our weapons systems have been inspected and certified as compliant by Accord oversight teams. But how? Demanded Councillor Thexari, his crystalline form pulsing with rapid analytical patterns. Your species achieved devastating military effectiveness using technologies our experts considered obsolete. Elena smiled slightly. Perhaps the issue is not with human technology, but with galactic assumptions about what constitutes primitive warfare. She activated the human delegation's presentation system. May I offer some historical perspective? The chamber's central display showed images of ancient Earth, focusing on early human settlements and the weapons they used for hunting and warfare. Simple bows, catapults, and siege engines appeared on screen. 4,000 years ago, humans developed these basic kinetic systems for survival. We never stopped improving them. The display evolved, showing the progression of human weapons technology through the centuries. While other species moved to energy weapons and exotic technologies, humans continued to refine mechanical systems alongside our more advanced developments. The images now showed modern human engineering, precision manufacturing, advanced material science, computer-controlled targeting systems. When the treaty required us to abandon energy weapons, we simply applied our full technological capability to perfecting the kinetic systems we had never abandoned. General Kothvar leaned forward in his environmental pod. You're saying your primitive weapons are not actually primitive? I'm saying that human definitions of primitive may differ from galactic assumptions, Elena replied diplomatically. Our rail launchers use electromagnetic acceleration, a principle discovered by humans thousands of years ago. We've simply optimized the engineering with modern materials and manufacturing precision. The display showed technical schematics of the weapon systems that had devastated the Sarkesh fleet. Each design was a masterwork of engineering that pushed the absolute limits of what could be achieved within treaty restrictions. Railguns that achieved near-light-speed projectile velocities, chemical propulsion systems that delivered warheads across interplanetary distances with pinpoint accuracy, kinetic penetrators that could punch through any known armor. But the energy requirements, protested Science Coordinator Velmoth of the Crystalline Collective. Our calculations suggest that achieving such projectile velocities should require power systems beyond what treaty-compliant vessels can generate. Elena's expression grew slightly predatory. That assumes you understand human power generation systems. We've always emphasized efficiency and redundancy in our engineering. Our ships may not use exotic matter reactors, but they can generate enormous amounts of conventional power when needed. What she didn't explain was that human ships had been redesigned from the ground up around their new weapon systems. Every aspect of their power generation, structural engineering, and tactical doctrine had been optimized for kinetic warfare. The results were vessels that could deliver devastating firepower while appearing to comply with treaty limitations. Warlord Grixtar, appearing via emergency communication link from his damaged flagship, added his voice to the discussion. His scarred features showed the haunted expression of a warrior who had encountered something beyond his understanding. The humans did not merely defeat our fleet, he reported grimly. They dismantled it with a precision that suggested they understood our capabilities better than we understood theirs. Their projectiles penetrated our armor at impact points calculated to cause maximum structural damage. Their ballistic missiles followed trajectories that exploited weaknesses in our formation patterns. This was not primitive warfare. It was warfare refined to an art form. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this information. The implications were staggering. Humanity had not merely found loopholes in the weapons treaty, they had revealed fundamental flaws in galactic thinking about warfare itself. Chancellor Vorthak raised a massive appendage for attention. Ambassador Vasquez, the Accord is concerned about the broader implications of these developments. If human kinetic weapons can defeat modern military technology, what does this mean for galactic security? Elena considered her response carefully. Chancellor, humanity has always believed that security comes from the ability to defend oneself and one's allies. The treaty asked us to abandon our advanced weapons in favor of primitive alternatives. We have complied, while ensuring that our primitive weapons remain effective. But surely you understand that this creates an arms race scenario, argued Representative Kyleth of the Aquarian Federation. Other species will now seek to develop similar capabilities. Other species are welcome to try, Elena replied with quiet confidence. However, human expertise in kinetic warfare has been developed over millennia. It cannot be easily replicated. This was the crucial point that Elena had been building toward. Humanity had not simply adapted to the treaty restrictions. They had turned those restrictions into an advantage. While other species would need decades or centuries to develop effective kinetic warfare capabilities, humans already possessed 4,000 years of innovation in mechanical systems. Counselor Thexari's light patterns shifted to something approaching resignation. You have demonstrated that the treaty's assumptions were flawed. Human compliance has not reduced your military effectiveness. It may have enhanced it. Counselor, Elena said diplomatically, humanity has always honored the spirit of galactic cooperation. We seek to defend ourselves and our allies, not to threaten the peace. However, we will not be rendered defenseless by well-intentioned but misguided restrictions. The debate continued for hours, but Elena could see the tide turning. The galaxy had wanted to limit human military capabilities without understanding what those capabilities actually were. The treaty had been based on the assumption that primitive weapons were inherently inferior to advanced ones. Humanity had just proven that assumption catastrophically wrong. As the session concluded, Elena reflected on the new position humanity found itself in. They had been forced to abandon advanced weapons, only to discover that their primitive alternatives were more effective than anyone had imagined. The galaxy had tried to clip humanity's wings, only to discover that humans had never needed wings to soar. The age of steel and honor was reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy, and humanity was proving once again that their greatest weapon was not any particular technology. It was their refusal to accept limitations on what was possible. The Galactic Accord would have to reconsider everything they thought. They knew about warfare, technology, and the species they had tried so hard to contain. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 186, the Terran Defense Academy on Mars had become the most sought-after military institution in the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species waited in carefully controlled atmospheric chambers, hoping to observe human tactical doctrine in action. What they witnessed challenged everything they understood about warfare. Colonel James Harrison stood before a mixed class of human and alien military officers, his weathered face showing the confidence of a man who had revolutionized galactic combat theory. Behind him, holographic displays showed the latest innovations in human kinetic warfare, weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of treaty compliance while achieving devastating effectiveness, the fundamental principle of human warfare. Harrison explained to his diverse audience, is adaptability. We do not rely on single solutions or advanced technologies that can fail. Instead, we ensure that every system, every tactic, and every piece of equipment can serve multiple purposes. In the front row, Commander Silthari of the Zephyrian Defense Force took careful notes, her crystalline form pulsing with analytical patterns. Beside her, Captain Morgeth of the Hegemony Fleet recorded every word with the intensity of a student discovering revolutionary concepts. Your electromagnetic launchers achieve projectile velocities that rival our energy weapons, Silthari observed, her harmonic voice carrying through the translation matrix. But our engineers estimate the power requirements should exceed what treaty-compliant vessels can generate. Harrison smiled. That's because your engineers are thinking like most galactic species, assuming that power generation requires exotic technologies. Human engineering has always emphasized what we call brute force elegance. We generate enormous conventional power through redundant systems and efficient design. The display shifted to show the internal layout of a human warship. Where alien vessels carried single powerful reactors using exotic matter, human ships contained dozens of smaller fusion reactors, each capable of independent operation. The total power output was enormous, and the redundancy meant that battle damage rarely left a human vessel helpless. But the real innovation, Harrison continued, is not in our power systems. It's in our projectiles themselves. The demonstration that followed left the alien observers speechless. Harrison activated a firing range where human weapon systems engaged practice targets. The tungsten projectiles fired from rail launchers weren't simple metal slugs. They were complex devices containing guidance systems, programmable matter that could reshape during flight, and even separation systems that allowed single projectiles to become multiple warheads. These projectiles cost more to manufacture than most energy weapons, admitted Captain Morgeth, studying the technical specifications with growing amazement. How do you justify the expense? Because they're reusable, Harrison replied. Unlike energy weapons that consume power with every shot, our projectiles can be recovered, refurbished, and fired again. A single tungsten penetrator might serve in dozens of engagements over its operational lifetime. This was another aspect of human warfare that the galaxy struggled to understand. While other species treated weapons as consumable resources, humans engineered their munitions for longevity and reuse. The result was weapon systems that appeared expensive initially but proved incredibly cost-effective. Over extended periods, the demonstration continued with the ballistic missile systems that had proven so effective against the Sarkesh. These weren't simple chemical rockets. They were sophisticated delivery platforms that could operate independently for hours or even days, following complex flight paths to strike targets with precision. Your missiles achieve interplanetary range with conventional propulsion, observed Science Officer Telvara of the Aquarian Federation. Our calculations suggest this should be impossible without exotic matter enhancement. It's not impossible, Harrison explained, if you're willing to think beyond conventional limitations. Our missiles use staged chemical propulsion with gravitational assists, extended duration guidance systems, and trajectory optimization that takes advantage of orbital mechanics. They're slow compared to energy weapons, but they can reach any target in a star system given sufficient time. The alien officers exchanged concerned glances. They were beginning to understand that human military doctrine wasn't just about advanced weapons, it was about fundamental approaches to problem-solving that other species had never considered. The final demonstration involved the weapon systems that had most puzzled Galactic observers, the trebuchets. These massive mechanical devices seemed absurdly primitive until they fired, launching payloads with devastating accuracy across vast distances. Trebuchets? Commander Silthari's crystalline form flickered with patterns indicating complete bewilderment. You're using siege weapons from your medieval period? Scaled up and optimized with modern engineering, Harrison confirmed. A trebuchet has no electronic signature, cannot be jammed or hacked, requires no power source beyond the initial loading, and can operate in any environment. Most importantly, it can launch payloads that no other species would consider weapons. The demonstration trebuchet fired a container that burst open in flight, releasing hundreds of smaller objects that scattered across a wide area. Each object was a kinetic penetrator designed to punch through armor and cause internal damage. The effect was like a shotgun blast scaled up to ship-to-ship combat. But why? Asked Captain Morgeth. Why develop such seemingly archaic systems when you could focus on more conventional weapons? Harrison's expression grew serious. Because conventional thinking leads to conventional vulnerabilities. Every energy weapon can be shielded against. Every exotic system can be countered with exotic defenses. But how do you defend against a 1,000-kilogram tungsten projectile, moving at significant fractions of light speed? The alien officers had no answer, because their species had never needed one. Their warfare had evolved along predictable technological lines, with weapons and defenses advancing in tandem. Human warfare rejected this paradigm entirely, embracing unpredictability as a tactical advantage. The lesson continued with examinations of human defensive systems. Where other species used energy shields and exotic armor, humans employed layered kinetic barriers, arrays of tungsten plates that could absorb and deflect incoming projectiles, combined with point defense systems that fired streams of smaller projectiles to intercept incoming weapons. Your point defense systems fire solid projectiles rather than energy beams, observed Telvara. Doesn't this create debris problems? It creates debris solutions, Harrison corrected. Our defensive fire doesn't just intercept incoming weapons, it creates clouds of kinetic fragments that act as area denial systems. Enemy ships that approach too closely find themselves navigating through fields of high-velocity debris. This was perhaps the most alien aspect of human warfare from the galactic perspective. While other species sought to minimize collateral effects and environmental impact, humans weaponized everything, including the byproducts of their own defensive systems. As the lesson concluded, Commander Silthari voiced the question that all the alien observers were thinking. Colonel Harrison, your species has essentially redefined warfare while remaining within treaty restrictions. What happens when other species attempt to duplicate these innovations? Harrison considered the question carefully. They're welcome to try. However, human expertise in kinetic warfare represents 4 millennia of continuous innovation. Our understanding of ballistics, metallurgy, mechanical engineering, and tactical doctrine has been refined through thousands of conflicts. This knowledge cannot be easily replicated. What Harrison didn't mention was that human military development was accelerating. Each engagement provided new data, new insights, and new innovations. While other species would spend decades trying to understand human tactics, humans would continue advancing their capabilities. The Terran Defense Academy had become more than an educational institution. It was a declaration of intent. Humanity would share their knowledge up to a point, but they would always maintain their technological edge. The galaxy had forced them to abandon advanced weapons, only to discover that human innovation could not be constrained by any treaty. As the alien officers departed, Harrison reflected on the transformation that had occurred since the Weapons Limitation Treaty. Humanity had been pushed back to primitive warfare, only to discover that primitive weapons in human hands were more sophisticated than advanced weapons in alien hands. The Age of Steel and Honor had established humanity as the dominant military force in the galaxy, not through superior technology but through superior thinking, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that they had created something far more dangerous than they had tried to prevent, a human military doctrine that turned limitations into advantages and constraints into innovations. The treaty that was meant to contain humanity had instead unleashed their greatest strength, their refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable. The crisis began in the Vega sector when the Void Hunters emerged from the Galactic Rim. Unlike any threat the galaxy had faced before, these mechanical entities possessed technology that rendered conventional energy weapons useless. Their ships phased through plasma beams, absorbed particle bombardment, and seemed immune to every exotic weapon system the Galactic Accord could deploy. Emergency alerts flooded communication. Networks across known space as 3 major star systems fell to the Void Hunters in rapid succession. The crystalline cities of Zephyria Prime went dark. The bioluminescent oceans of Nereid became lifeless voids. Even the mighty fortress worlds of the hegemony collapsed under assault from enemies that conventional warfare could not touch. In the Galactic Accord's Emergency Command Center, Chancellor Vorthak stood before tactical displays showing the relentless advance of the Void Hunters. His massive frame radiated the despair that had gripped the galaxy as every military engagement ended in devastating defeat. Honored representatives, Vorthak announced with heavy resignation, our combined fleets have engaged the invaders 17 times. In every encounter, our energy weapons have proven completely ineffective. The enemy technology appears to exist partially outside normal space-time, making traditional warfare impossible. Counselor Thexari's crystalline form flickered with rapid patterns of analysis and growing fear. Our science divisions estimate that the Void Hunters' adaptive shielding neutralizes energy weapons by dispersing them across multiple dimensional phases. No conventional military technology can penetrate their defenses. Around the chamber, delegates from hundreds of worlds exhibited the universal signs of desperation. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had built their entire military doctrine around energy weapons and exotic technologies. Against an enemy immune to such weapons, they were essentially defenseless. General Kothvar of the Hegemony Military Council activated his communication system, his scarred features showing the defeat of a professional soldier encountering an impossible enemy. Our heavy battleships cannot even scratch their hulls. Our most powerful plasma cannons might as well be primitive flashlights. The enemy advances at will and we cannot stop them. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had been sitting quietly in the human delegation pod, observing the proceedings with growing understanding. As the reports of defeat continued, she began to see a pattern that the other delegates had missed. The Void Hunters weren't just immune to energy weapons, they were specifically adapted to counter them. "Chancellor," Elena said, rising from her seat, "has anyone attempted to engage the Void Hunters with kinetic weapons?" The chamber fell silent. Hundreds of alien gazes focused on the human representative with expressions ranging from confusion to desperate hope. "Ambassador Vasquez," Vorthak replied slowly, "the Void Hunter technology appears to be beyond anything our civilizations have encountered. Why would primitive kinetic weapons succeed where our most advanced systems have failed?" Elena smiled grimly. "Perhaps because the enemy has adapted specifically to counter advanced systems. Their defenses may be optimized for energy weapons and exotic technologies, leaving them vulnerable to approaches they don't expect." Councillor Thexari's light patterns shifted to something approaching desperate interest. "Are you suggesting that human weapons might be effective against the Void Hunters?" "I'm suggesting that we should find out," Elena replied. "Humanity has had the opportunity to refine our kinetic warfare capabilities over the past year. Our fleet stands ready to test those capabilities against this new threat." The debate that followed was intense but brief. With conventional military forces proving useless against the Void Hunters, the Galactic Accord had little choice but to authorize human intervention. Within hours, Admiral Harrison received orders to deploy the human fleet against the advancing enemy. The HMS Retribution led a task force of 50 human vessels toward the Altair system, where a massive Void Hunter fleet was systematically dismantling the orbital infrastructure. Captain Chen stood on her bridge, watching the enemy forces with the calm confidence of a professional who understood her capabilities. "Tactical analysis. Lieutenant Commander Walsh," she ordered. Walsh studied the enemy ships through long-range sensors, noting their unusual configurations and energy signatures. "Captain, the Void Hunter vessels appear to be partially phased, existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Their hulls show no traditional armor patterns, suggesting they rely entirely on their dimensional shielding for defense. Energy signatures, massive exotic matter manipulation, quantum field generators, and what appears to be localized space-time distortion. Everything about them screams advanced technology." Chen nodded. This confirmed her suspicions about the enemy's nature. The Void Hunters were so technologically advanced that they had forgotten how to defend against primitive attacks. "Load all rail launchers with tungsten penetrators," she ordered. "Maximum charge on the electromagnetic acceleration systems. If these things exist partially outside normal space, let's see how they handle high-velocity matter that definitely exists in normal space." The human fleet deployed in the formation they had perfected against the Sarkesh, a loose pattern that maximized their kinetic weapons' effectiveness while minimizing their vulnerability to return fire. As they approached the Void Hunter formation, the enemy vessels turned to engage them with weapons that twisted space itself. The first exchange was revelatory. Void Hunter weapons tore through space-time, creating distortions that should have destroyed any conventional vessel. But human ships were built for redundancy and damage tolerance. When exotic weapons damaged their primary systems, backup systems engaged. When hull sections were destroyed, compartmentalization prevented total structural failure. "Return fire," Chen ordered. The Retribution's rail launchers spoke with mechanical precision, accelerating tungsten projectiles to tremendous velocity. Unlike the energy weapons the Void Hunters were accustomed to, these solid projectiles existed entirely in normal space-time and carried massive kinetic energy. The impact was spectacular. The tungsten rounds punched through the Void Hunter's dimensional shielding like it didn't exist. Because from the projectile's perspective, it didn't. The enemy shields were designed to disperse energy across multiple dimensions. but they had no mechanism for dealing with solid matter traveling at significant fractions of light speed. Direct hits, Walsh reported with amazement. The enemy shields are completely ineffective against kinetic impact. Across the human fleet, similar results were occurring. The HMS Vengeance fired its massive siege cannon, sending a 1,000-kilogram penetrator round through 2 Void Hunter vessels. The ballistic missile systems that had proven so effective against the Sarkesh began delivering their payloads across vast distances, striking enemy ships that thought themselves safely out of range. Most devastatingly, the trebuchets began their work. The Void Hunters, with their advanced technology and sophisticated defenses, had no counter for mechanical weapons that required no power, generated no energy signatures, and delivered kinetic payloads with the reliability of clockwork. "Captain," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving panicked transmissions from the Void Hunter fleet. Their language is being translated as expressions of complete bewilderment." Chen allowed herself a slight smile. The enemy had evolved to counter every advanced military technology the galaxy possessed. They had adaptive shielding for energy weapons, dimensional phases to avoid exotic matter attacks, and space-time manipulation to neutralize conventional tactics. What they didn't have was any defense against humans hitting them with very large, very fast pieces of metal. The battle turned into a rout. Void Hunter vessels that had seemed invincible against galactic forces found themselves systematically destroyed by weapons their designers had never considered. Their advanced technology, optimized for countering energy-based attacks, was completely useless against the kinetic bombardment that human forces delivered with devastating precision. "Admiral, Harrison to all vessels," came the fleet commander's voice across the communication network. "The enemy is breaking formation and attempting to withdraw. Pursue and harass but maintain tactical discipline. We want survivors to carry word back to their commanders." As the Void Hunter remnants fled toward the galactic rim, Chen reflected on what had just occurred. Once again, humanity's return to primitive warfare had proven devastatingly effective against enemies who had never learned to defend against such attacks. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had built their entire military doctrine around sophisticated weapons and exotic technologies. When confronted with an enemy immune to such weapons, they were helpless. But humans, forced by treaty to abandon advanced weapons, had perfected primitive alternatives to a degree that made them more effective than any sophisticated system. "Set course for the next Void Hunter incursion," Chen ordered. "It's time to show the galaxy that sometimes the oldest solutions are still the best ones." The age of steel and honor had found its greatest test in the Void Hunters, and humanity had passed with devastating effectiveness. The galaxy was about to learn that their salvation lay not in advanced technology, but in the species they had tried so hard to constrain. 1 year after the Void Hunter crisis, the Galactic Accord convened its most significant assembly in over a millennium. The Great Chamber had been expanded to accommodate representatives from newly contacted species who had witnessed humanity's defense of the galaxy. Where once the chamber held delegates from 347 worlds, it now hosted over 600 species who had come to understand a fundamental truth. Humanity had become the galaxy's shield. Chancellor Vorthak stood before the assembly, his massive frame showing the weariness of a leader who had watched his civilization's assumptions crumble and rebuild. Behind him, holographic displays showed the current state of galactic security. Dozens of previously impregnable fortress worlds now flying human-designed kinetic defense platforms, trade routes protected by human escort vessels, and former enemy territories pacified by the mere threat of human intervention. "Honored representatives," Vorthak began, "we gathered today to address the transformation that has occurred in our galaxy. The Universal Weapons Limitation Treaty, intended to constrain human military capabilities, has instead created a new paradigm for galactic defense." Ambassador Elena Vasquez observed the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. The past year had seen humanity evolve from reluctant treaty compliance to galactic protectors, not through conquest or coercion, but through simple effectiveness. When civilizations faced threats they couldn't handle with energy weapons and exotic technologies, they called for human assistance. Counselor Thexari activated her communication system, her crystalline form pulsing with patterns that conveyed both gratitude and profound respect. The Zephyrian Collective owes its continued existence to human intervention. When the Void Hunters penetrated our defenses, human kinetic weapons succeeded where our most advanced technologies failed. We now understand that sophistication is not synonymous with effectiveness. Similar testimonials came from across the chamber. The Aquarian Federation described how human ballistic missile systems had cleared their space lanes of pirates using phase technology. The Hegemony Military Council admitted that their fortress worlds were now defended by human-designed trebuchets and rail launchers because traditional defenses had proven inadequate against emerging threats. General Kothvar, his scarred features showing a newfound respect for human tactical doctrine, provided the most telling assessment. Human warfare has evolved beyond our comprehension not because of advanced technology, but because of advanced thinking. They have weaponized principles that our civilizations abandoned millennia ago, refining primitive concepts to a degree that makes them superior to our sophisticated systems. The transformation was visible throughout the galaxy. Human military advisors worked with alien defense forces, teaching kinetic warfare principles to species that had never considered the possibility. Human shipyards produced vessels for alien navies, designs that combined human kinetic weapons with alien technological capabilities. Most significantly, the Human Defense Academy had become the premier military institution in known space. With waiting lists that stretched across decades, Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen and commander of the Galactic Defense Initiative, addressed the assembly via holographic projection from her flagship. The HMS Determination had been rebuilt and expanded, serving as the mobile headquarters for humanity's growing role as galactic protectors. Honored delegates, she said. Humanity did not seek the role of galactic defenders. We simply refused to accept that any challenge was insurmountable. When the treaty forced us to abandon advanced weapons, we perfected primitive ones. When the Void Hunters proved immune to conventional warfare, we demonstrated that unconventional approaches could still succeed. What Admiral Chen didn't mention was the continuing evolution of human military capabilities. Freed from the constraints of trying to match alien technological development, human innovation had accelerated dramatically. Their kinetic weapons now incorporated gravitational manipulation to increase projectile velocity. Their ballistic missiles used exotic matter navigation systems while maintaining chemical propulsion. Their trebuchets launched payloads that contained programmable matter capable of reshaping itself during flight. The treaty had intended to limit human weapons to primitive technologies, but it had never defined what qualified as primitive. Humans had taken advantage of this ambiguity to create weapon systems that technically complied with treaty restrictions while achieving capabilities that exceeded anything the galaxy had previously imagined. Representative Velkoth of the Outer Rim Coalition posed the question that had brought the assembly together. Humanity has proven that kinetic warfare can be more effective than energy-based systems. Should the Galactic Accord reconsider the weapons limitations that have shaped our military doctrine? The debate that followed revealed the fundamental transformation that had occurred in galactic thinking. Species after species acknowledged that their reliance on advanced technologies had created vulnerabilities that only primitive weapons could address. Energy shields were useless against kinetic projectiles. Exotic matter manipulation provided no defense against chemical explosives. Dimensional phasing technology couldn't stop mechanical weapons that existed entirely in normal space-time. The treaty was intended to prevent an arms race, observed Science Coordinator Zalthis. Instead, it has demonstrated that our definition of advanced warfare was fundamentally flawed. Humans have shown us that effectiveness matters more than sophistication. Elena Vasquez rose to address this point directly. Humanity has never sought to impose our military doctrine on other species. We have simply demonstrated that limitations can become advantages if approached with sufficient creativity. The treaty forced us to think differently about warfare, and the results have benefited the entire galaxy. This was the crucial insight that had emerged from humanity's enforced return to kinetic warfare. By abandoning the technological arms race that had dominated galactic military development, humans had discovered tactical and strategic innovations that their competitors couldn't match. They had turned constraints into catalysts for innovation. The final testimony came from an unexpected source, Warlord Grixtar of the Sarkesh war clans, appearing via secure communication link. His scarred features showed the transformation that had occurred within his own culture since their defeat at Kepler 186. The Sarkesh have learned much from human warfare, he admitted with grudging respect. We approached combat as a test of technological superiority, believing that advanced weapons guaranteed victory. Humans taught us that warfare is a test of adaptive thinking, not advanced equipment. Our clans now study human tactical doctrine, seeking to understand how primitive weapons can achieve superior results. Even former enemies had become students of human innovation. The galaxy had discovered that humanity's greatest contribution wasn't any particular weapon or technology, it was their approach to problem-solving that refused to accept conventional limitations. As the assembly moved toward its conclusion, Chancellor Vorthak posed the final question that would shape the galaxy's future. The evidence is clear that kinetic warfare principles offer advantages that our traditional military doctrine cannot match. Should the Galactic Accord formally adopt human tactical innovations as the standard for galactic defense? Elena considered her response carefully. Chancellor, humanity would be honored to share our knowledge with any species seeking to improve their defensive capabilities. However, we believe that the galaxy's strength lies in diversity of approach, not uniformity of doctrine. Each species should develop military capabilities that match their unique strengths and circumstances. What Elena really meant was that human tactical advantages lay not just in their weapons, but in their culture of innovation that had developed over millennia of conflict. Other species could adopt human weapons and techniques, but they couldn't easily replicate the thinking processes that made those weapons effective. The assembly concluded with a historic decision. The Universal Weapons Limitation Treaty would be amended to encourage kinetic warfare development while maintaining restrictions on exotic technologies that could threaten entire star systems. Humanity would establish training programs and technical assistance initiatives to help other species develop effective kinetic defenses. But perhaps most significantly, humanity had been formally recognized as the primary guarantors of galactic peace, not through conquest or coercion, but through demonstration of capabilities that no other species could match. As delegates departed to carry news of the decision to their home worlds, Elena reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred. The treaty that was meant to constrain humanity had instead unleashed their greatest strengths. Forced to abandon sophisticated weapons, they had perfected primitive ones beyond the galaxy's comprehension. The age of steel and honor had established humanity not as conquerors, but as protectors. They had proven that innovation could not be limited by treaties, that creativity could turn constraints into advantages, and that sometimes the most effective solutions were also the oldest ones. The galaxy had tried to limit human warfare, only to discover that human warfare had no limits. In seeking to constrain humanity's military capabilities, the Galactic A